Right, guys, we've got a lot to get through. Shall we get started?
Let's do it.
Cool. Good. So, welcome everyone. I'm lucky enough to be hosting this so I can see who's attended. So, it's nice to see some people we know, and it's also nice to see some new names. So, I guess if you are new to pharma brands, this is what we do. You're kind of living it. We provide education, experiences, inspiration via training and events in, I guess, what we believe to be one of the most challenging and important areas of communication there is in healthcare. So the content today focuses on Gen AI, particularly how to get started, and the content has been developed by marketers for marketers. So thank you, Tim. Thank you, John. Um, Tim and John will introduce themselves shortly. They're both amazing. So Tim's a professional trainer, background with lots of big brands. I mean, Nike, Virgin, BMW, as well as life science companies. So we work with Tim a lot. He's part of our Pharma Brands family. And Tim and his company, Kickframe, are our training partner. So we deliver training with them on Gen AI, digital marketing together. And John, you can introduce yourself, but you are living the Gen AI dream at the moment at AstraZeneca. So John's here to share some like real life in time experiences. Um, I have the fun job of housekeeping. So if you do have a question, drop it in the Q&A. I'm looking at it and we can be really flexible and answer them throughout or at the end, whichever fits best. And we are recording this, so you will be able to go back to it. So you don't need to be taking notes or anything like that. Be present, be involved, be active. So thank you so much. We know, I guess it's a busy time. It's Friday. It's almost the holidays. We're all trying to deliver what we need to do, plus manage, I don't know, bake sales and school plays. So thank you very much for making the time. Thanks again to John and Tim. Like, let's do it. Over to you guys.
That's great. John, do you want to introduce yourself quickly, and then I'll take things from there?
Absolutely. I'm John Chiriboga. I'm the Director of Marketing Innovation and of Digital Excellence at AstraZeneca, Canada. I've been in the CRM and the digital space for my entire career, working at both the agency side, McLaren McCann and BIM, and then working for organizations like Holt Renfrew, Mercedes-Benz, the Home Depot, and McDonald's. I've been with AstraZeneca for it's gonna be 5 years in January, and my team is responsible for digital customer engagement for the organization. Happy to be here.
Amazing. And as Kate said, my name is Tim Dolan. I have a company called Kickframe, and my background, similar to John, has been around digital marketing, both on a consulting and the agency side. But for the last 10 years, I've been really focusing on kind of working with businesses and marketing teams to upskill around different facets of technology in a marketing context. And so many of those clients over the last couple of years have obviously been, quite focused on generative AI. So I was happy to work with Kate and team to put some material together here to share a little bit about what I've been learning and we've been learning about the best way to get started as it relates to generative AI in a marketing context. So the purpose of the session here today is to help pharma marketers begin to use AI within their teams more effectively. And so why did we think that this was, a timely thing to spend your time on prior to the holidays? Why a webinar and getting started? Well, I think one of the things that I've noticed is there's a little bit of a tension. And so one of the things that probably caught your attention a couple of years ago, it certainly caught mine and many of my clients, was when Sam Altman from OpenAI shared this quote about the opportunity of AI within a marketing context. 95% of what marketers, use agencies, strategists, and creative professionals for today will easily, nearly instantly, and at almost no cost be handled by AI. And so this is kind of expectation has really been heightened even across a lot of industries. Recent data shows that 96% of senior leaders expect AI to help with productivity. So expectations around AI and generative AI in particular are really high. However, one of the things that I've found really interesting is there's data that's starting to come back, surveys of the workplace over the last couple of years or last year. And the results are kind of mixed. And so it's not kind of overwhelmingly positive in terms of the impact and outcomes from using AI. In fact, one survey showed that 70%, 77% of employees say that AI is actually added to their workload when many of their managers are providing them with some of these tools and they're trying to figure out how to best use them on top of their own day to day. So we've got this sort of interesting tension around, this theoretical promise in a way and expectations around how generative AI can help, and then the practical reality of how challenging it can be to try to find the best opportunities to be able to incorporate the technology to benefit organizations. And so what we wanted to spend a little bit of time on today is if you're in a situation where you are, thinking about bringing on AI, what are some of the things that you can do to put yourself in the best position to have better outcomes? So that's what we're going to be focusing on today. And I think, Kate, you have a quick poll of the audience. So just to get a sense of the temperature in here, how important do you think generative AI will be in the future of pharmaceutical marketing and communications? If everyone could just take a moment to answer that question, and we'll keep that in mind as we go through the remainder of the slides. The votes are in. All right, let's see the results. Okay, extremely to very important. And we have one individual that not very important at all. So, or not very important. So we'll try to figure out who you are by the end of the session. That will be my chore. So clearly, some folks on the call here that are expressing some interest. That's probably why you are here, about what this could mean in terms of what generative AI could offer. So always interesting to understand where people's mindsets are. So what are we going to do today? And we've got a lot of stuff to cover, and I will keep my eye on the time. Kate, keep me honest too, please, to cover. So we're going to do a little bit of an intro to AI to marketers, probably going to be kind of familiar to some folks, but I think it's a helpful grounding before we get into some of the other material. We'll talk about the application of some AI, and we'll focus on some tools and use cases. We'll talk about some tips on getting started. What are some steps that teams can take to put themselves in a better position to bring generative AI within their marketing workflows? And then we've got at minimum 15 minutes with John at the end where we can pepper him with some questions about, what he's doing in this area and what that looks like in his AstraZeneca team. So intro to AI for marketers. Again, this is not a new technology or term. It was defined in 1956, but I think it's important. I've done a lot of training on technology and digital, and AI it reminds me a lot of like when we started to train folks on digital. It's kind of a loaded term and it can have different definitions for different people. So I think it's important in your teams and even in our session here today that we have kind of a shared understanding of what we're talking about here when we talk about AI. Because as marketers, we've been using AI in some facet and form for many, many years, whether it's been around, whether it's doing media planning and buying, whether it's doing forecasting and analysis and analytics, whether it's even looking at some of the tools that are available to be able to do things like subject line testing. A lot of the AI has been built into a lot of the tools that we've been using for many years. So what's changed? And what's changed really is the kind of the unlocking of a lot of these different models and the application of those models into tools that marketers can use. And so when we think about AI, AI refers to the discipline, and there's a lot that can be unpacked within that. It's the discipline of creating computer programs that can complete cognitive tasks typically associated with human intelligence. But the area that we're going to be focusing on here, and I think the area that has really captured a lot of marketers' imaginations, is generative AI, a subset of AI, and which is a subset of deep learning and machine learning. So generative AI is the type of AI that creates new content, such as text, images, music, by learning on existing data. And so ChatGPT, as many of us are familiar with, is a generative AI tool that's powered by a large language model. And this concept of tools and models can also be quite easily interchanged. And so I think it's helpful to get a shared understanding of what we mean by each. And so, an AI model is a computer program trained on a set of data to recognize patterns and perform specific tasks. The tool, what we interface with, is the software that can automate or assist users with a variety of those tasks. And so, these tools can come in different shapes and sizes. I'm going to be showing a lot of what are referred to as standalone tools, and these would be ones that you can sign up for and access for typically quite a narrow set of use cases. They could be integrated, like features that could be done within the Adobe suite. And there could be custom tools that people create with their own models and with their own data. And what we're seeing now is that large organizations are usually using a mix of all of these different tools. And so, what does this all mean? Well, there's some benefits and then some challenges and risks that are facing marketers today. The benefits, I think what people got really excited about with quotes like from Sam Altman and some of the projections from senior leaders is there could be a lot of different productivity gains that could be represented from generative AI around automating repetitive tasks or analyzing data or generating content that can require a lot of time and resources. But it can also present a number of different challenges. We won't go too deep into these different areas. Many of them you're probably going to be quite familiar with. But the quality of the output, for example, there could be limitations in the training data that it's using. It can hallucinate, and there can require a lot of data which may not be readily available within marketing departments today. And then there could be a number of risks specific for marketers. It could be there's a very gray area about copywriting content that is generated in part from AI. In speaking to a lot of folks within the creative community, because a lot of these generative AI tools are really trained on existing images and copy and content and writing, what you're coming out with is by definition derivative. And there could be a lot of different risks in terms of exposing confidential information. And even there could be risks, not just with what you're doing with AI, but what maybe some of your partners and agencies are doing too in terms of their policies. It could be some exposure there. And so covered a lot of ground there, but I think it's important to have a shared understanding of what AI is, how it applies to marketing, and what are some of those pros and cons and considerations of using it. Kate, I think we have another poll here. Current use of generative AI. So let's take the temperature again. How would you characterize your use of generative AI in marketing today? Not using it all, up to fully integrating it into your regular marketing workflows. Very curious where we're going to land here. Okay. So kind of in the middle. I find this really interesting because this is a question that I've been doing training now for about 18 months on this topic and different variations. And it's interesting because this is a question I'll ask all the time. And you definitely see an uptick in terms of occasional and regular use. If you look at the data, this is pretty characteristic of what workplaces are saying. There's been a big spike in adoption over the last 6 months, but mostly it's been kind of episodic or not something that's deeply integrated, depending on the task of what people are doing day to day to day. So I think probably pretty representative of the larger kind of the workforce in terms of trying to figure out the fit of these tools and where they might benefit us in our roles. So let's get into the next section. And so what I thought it would do is quite quickly um, talk a little bit about how some of these different tools can apply to uh, different common tasks within marketing. And just based on the poll there, many of you are probably using some of these different tools or at least technologies to be able to accomplish different kinds of tasks because there's some really interesting intersections in terms of what these models can do and what are some of the tasks that marketers commonly have to tackle. So generating ideas or writing copy or analyzing marketing material or particularly generating and editing code. And so what I thought I would do is, because I know pharma marketers and healthcare marketers are really heads down and don't necessarily have the time that a trainer like me might have to try a lot of these different tools, is to share some of these different standalone tools, and not just kind of go through like product demos, but put them in the context of how they might help complete a particular marketing task. And so I'm going to take a sample here. And it's, for example, if I wanted to introduce my own podcast based on what we're talking about here today. So I'm going to go through a number of different steps, but these could easily map to, for example, creating a webinar that targets HCPs. So many of these types of tasks would also be included if you wanted to do that kind of, healthcare specific project. So let's explore how some of these different tools might help me to be able to create and launch a new podcast. And so the first thing I might do is conduct some research. And so here I might want to understand what are the most effective ways to promote my podcast. A tool that could be available to me if you haven't used it before, it's worth a try. It's called Perplexity. What it does is, rather than to Google it, is you Plex it. And rather than giving you a lot of blue links to websites, it provides a summarization of a lot of what it's searching for across the web. What I kind of like about it is it also includes the sources. And so if you want to be able to do a deeper dive into where it's pulling the information from, you can do that. So it can be helpful for me to be able to conduct some research. And then, as any good strategic planner, I need to be able to write a brief if I want to work with a team to come up with a marketing plan. There's some standalone tools. This one is referred to as Briefly, or now Briefly Labs. And you train this tool on a number of your own briefs, and providing it with some information about your goals, brand voice. And it's also trained on what it refers to as best-in-class briefs. And I can go in here and use this tool to be able to write or rewrite or get some ideas about completing different sections. I personally find these kinds of tools really interesting around more executional briefs that end up taking a lot of time, could potentially kind of free yourself or free your team up to be able to spend more kind of human thinking time on more of those strategic and creative briefs. And then I might want to generate some ideas, like what are some of these different tactics that I might want to explore to be able to let people know about this. And so if I'm going to use a large language model, one of the things that I want to keep in mind is how am I able to structure a prompt? We won't go super deep into that here, but a very common framework would be identifying a role, a goal, providing it with some instructions, providing it with an example, as well as providing it with constraints and describing the format of the output that I might be looking for. And so I could create a prompt to be able to help me identify marketing recommendations for promoting a new AI podcast. And I'm giving it the role of an expert in promoting podcasts to be able to do so. And I can provide it with a little bit more specificity in terms of guidelines in the format that I want this to come out in. So I could use a large language model, a frontier model like Claude. And in this particular case, it's providing me with a lot of these different ideas that I can potentially pursue. So again, am I going to take these ideas and just run with them? No, but is it a great sort of place to start rather than working from a blank sheet of paper? I think it's productive. The other part is I find, I might have a list of things in my consulting work that are a list of recommendations, and I can kind of go to these tools and see if there's anything that I missed, any blind spots that I might have. So I find this kind of work really helpful at the beginning or the end of any of these kinds of research tasks. In this case, it's the beginning. And then I want to be able to create a really cool brand and logo and design language for what I want to be able to do. And so here I can use a generative AI tool called Brandmark to be able to create some very interesting logos. Each one of these I can click into and start to make some edits. The thing that's sort of interesting is they can kind of apply in case in addition to podcasting, I might want to do cosmetics or print some business cards. But again, kind of an interesting way to explore different design options using a tool that wouldn't necessarily be accessible for folks beyond those with access to a design department. And then I may want to let people know about the podcast. So I might write some copy to be able to send in an email either out to press or to people that might follow me in other channels. There's a number of different AI tools for writing. This one's referred to as Quillbot. There's Grammarly. There's also Gemini incorporated within the Google tools. One of the things that I find really interesting in the application within marketing is you might have different segments that you want to do different tones or evens format to different audiences. And so you can have kind of a master file of copy and use that as a basis to create different versions in a time that's really quickly. And then I might want to create images. And so I want to do some maybe social posts. And so I can use, a number of different tools. This is using DALL-E within ChatGPT. And then I might want something a little bit richer. If I had put these slides together this morning, I would have used the new Sora tool from OpenAI, but this one is from Luma. And here I might get a small clip based on a prompt that I'm providing it from text to video. And then what's I think really interesting, and we'll get into this with John, is I might use a tool that's really designed to be able to create different versions of marketing assets, things like social posts, or in this particular case, I might be looking for banner ads. And so I'm providing it with some of these assets that I've created, some direction around what my brand is like, and it's providing me with a starting point for different assets and versions of assets that align to the formats that I would need to be able to do things like social posts and banner advertising. This is a tool called Ad Creative. I think there's another one we're going to be talking about referred to as Jasper. And then this is getting meta here. This is me talking about me. But because I'm going to be creating a podcast, I might want to give people a sample of what that sort of looks like. And so you can use some of these tools. There's one called Hey Gen. In this case, this is actually a virtual avatar of me. I'm not sure if you can listen to it, but you get the point. Is that I'm able to provide it with a script. It's trained on a model. I'm not a model professionally, but it's created a model based on me, and I can provide it with a script, and it is very creepily giving it a promotion on the podcast that's coming up. But really interesting application when I think about things like webinars and training videos. You don't have to necessarily re-record. If you have some of these high quality avatars, it's as easy as going in and editing copy. And so a real time saver. And then if I have a lot of these long form podcasts, I might want to do a very common thing, which is promote them on social. And so there are tools. In this case, it's Opus Clip, as I can put in a long form video and it can automatically create a number of smaller video clips with transcription that I can then use to be able to publish. So taking a lot of time and effort at a video editing. And then finally, I won't belabor you with this, but I can also create my own song if I wanted to do so. So all of these tools, it's hopefully helpful to get a sense of what's available. It's also, if we were going to do this webinar probably 6 months from now, the tools that I'd be showing would be different because they're changing all the time. If you're interested in trialing different tools, AZ16 has a quarterly update of the most popular consumer-focused AI tools. I find it really helpful just to sort of sample some different ones. They're not necessarily marketing, but you get a better sense of what's happening. And then the other part is, these are, really expanding and improving all the time. And so even if you play with some of these tools and you're not necessarily happy with the output today, you take a look at the difference in the quality. This is just 2 years using Midjourney, and you see how much it's improved over time. There's a common axiom within AI to say this is the worst AI that you'll be using today. It's improving so quickly. And so we need to kind of not just keep up on the tools, but understand these tools are improving. And so while there might not be an opportunity today, there might be one coming very shortly. I think we have another poll there. I'm just going to pause. So we went through a lot there. When you think about generative AI and its fit with some of the tasks that your marketing team might explore, what applications strike you as most interesting? All right. Whoa, what a range, actually. Insights and okay, content creation being the biggest one, followed by insights, followed by research. Interesting. All right. Thank you for your submissions. And so now I'd like to get into a little bit of the meat of what we really wanted to talk about was how do we really start to get started? So we kind of covered what AI is, talk about some of the applications to common marketing tasks. And so if, as many of you are bringing on generative AI within the marketing teams, what are some of the things that we need to be thinking of? And so I'll just cover these areas in the interest of time. There's obviously many more things, but um, we're going to cover a little bit about governance, guidelines, and then finding the right use cases. And so I think this is a really important point, and we were sort of talking about this in advance of the webinar. I think there's a lot that we can learn about the application of AI within larger organizations based on what we learned within social media. Social media, was this is this sort of media and technology that offered a lot to marketers, but it was sort of horizontal. It also was something that was going to impact recruiting, um, R&D, legal, and so there was a lot, if you can remember, that we did at the time, where it was sort of organizing cross-functional teams around how we could best bring on this new media and technology and organize ourselves in a way that was going to be good for the business as well as sort of protect ourselves against downside risk. And so I think we have to consider AI in the same way. It's referred to as a general purpose technology, but within a business context, there's a lot of different, implications and opportunities across our organization. So as a result, we need to find ways to be able to, create groups that are going to represent different parts of the business to make sure that we're investing in establishing controls that make the most sense going forward. And so this is a big, when you start to unpack what are some of the different barriers to generative AI adoption, this is a big one, is around just having governance around AI itself. And so only 29% of folks, this is a survey of marketing teams, say that they work in an organization where they have like an AI council in charge of developing AI policies and practices. And so this is obviously a big area of opportunity if we want to have a more organizational perspective on bringing some of these AI tools in. And so what would sort of an AI council or a team that would be responsible for AI adoption really be on task for? And so this would be some of the things that we'd be responsible for could be communicating the AI adoption experimentation, training teams on how to properly use AI, figuring out the right kind of use cases, figuring out like how that maps to, HR decisions and workflow. So there's a lot here that kind of just can't be put on the shoulders of a couple of AI enthusiasts within a team. They need to be a little bit more mature in organizing and involving multiple people to be able to make some of these different decisions because there's a lot of, implications and stuff behind there. So what does that team start to look like? I know personally, I've seen sort of different models. I've seen sometimes, AI brought into like a MarTech governance group. And then I've seen other models where there'd be like an AI team that's essentially cross-functional that would meet at different points of the year. But regardless of the model, there still needs to be different people involved within it. One is a senior sponsor to make sure that there's alignment around how AI decisions ladder up to the bigger picture strategy, as well as someone that's going to advocate for resources and funding. And then you need to have marketing leaders, and depending on the size and the nature of your team, it could be sort of folks on the brand side, but also on like the creative and production side of providing feedback around where the opportunities and considerations might be. And then you might have organizational stakeholders. I know this would be sort of big within the pharma field of understanding, if there's legal and compliance and data and IT, how are you going to involve them? And then a lot of this falls down to some of the basics that we understand around change management, getting people aware of the change, behind the change, trained on the change, and reinforce those things. And I think this is where having a dedicated project manager, or at least somebody that's on the hook to sort of see that this mandate is pushed forward, can be really important. And so within a pharma context, you may come up with an AI council that looks something like this, where you have, a digital channel manager within the marketing leaders space, but you also have, representation from compliance and HR and legal and operations that are really providing feedback around some of these different decisions. One of the things that I like that I think we've learned from social media, that we've learned from like digital adoption, because we've seen other types of councils, is it can't fall on the shoulders of a couple of like AI enthusiasts. It really needs to be more of an organizational wide or team wide plan. So the next part is around guidelines. And this is, I find, really interesting. And so I speak with a lot of different organizations, and sometimes it can either feel like the Wild West or it's like complete lockdown in terms of the types of things that they can do with some of the AI tools that are available. And this is kind of not a surprise because research shows that only 32% of marketers say their companies have some generative AI policies in place. And it can make for some really kind of awkward dynamics. There was an interesting study that came out from Microsoft not that long ago, looking at use, and they said that I think it was around 50% of employees say they use AI but don't disclose it to their employers. And so again, there's this sort of tension here, even just on a personal level, around people being interested in trying some of these tools, but really being uncomfortable disclosing them for a variety of different reasons. And so guidelines can start to help that sort of advocate for its proper use, as well as help people understand if they're being compliant or not. And these guidelines, just like governance teams, really kind of vary depending on the organization. And so, depending on the size of the team and the risk profile of your organization or your market, those guidelines can be more and more in depth and strict. And so, when I think of pharma, I think you're in the top right-hand corner here. That just reinforce again the importance of having these kind of clearly articulated guidelines for your team, because it's a balancing act. We talked about some of the benefits that generative AI can present around productivity, but there's also some downside risk, right? And so we need to be able to balance those types of things, and you need the people and the processes to be able to articulate that. And so one of the things we like to do in training is provide, practical templates and things that you can kind of apply within your teams coming out of the training session. Here's a quick one that you can use around coming up with quick guidelines. These guidelines don't have to be like giant documents. I've worked with teams that essentially it's like a 2-page Google Doc that gets updated periodically, but it incorporates some of these types of things to be able to sort of align with. This could be a really kind of interesting working session to be able to do to get a V1 draft if these don't exist already within your marketing team, is just talk a little bit about, priorities. Where do we think we're going to get the most value, out of AI today? Where are we not going to do that? What are specific use cases that we want to explore? Are there areas that we absolutely do not feel comfortable touching right now? Are there specific tools that we want to use or any sort of criteria that we need to be mindful of in choosing which ones we want to be able to bring on? If so, what are they? Who can use these tools? What kind of training is required? Are they only for certain roles? That can be really helpful to start to articulate. And disclosure. And this could be disclosure for internal. When do you have to tell your colleagues or manager when you're using AI for certain kind of output? And there may also be external. If you're sharing, generative AI produced images or video, is that something that you want to feel comfortable or have to share with external audiences too? What are some of the risks that you know now that you want to actively mitigate? And then because AI is changing all the time, because you're going to be learning about what's working and not working with the tools that you use, how are you going to update these? What's the mechanism to be able to change these guidelines? It's worth talking about that within these guidelines themselves. So as I said, this could be done, as a V1 with a team over a workshop, and the output doesn't need to be a huge legalese document. Here's an example, pharma specific of what one might look like. Here we have some marketing priorities that are communicated around We're saying educational content creation and process automation is going to be the area that we want to focus on. The use cases are going to be around things like content for social, newsletters, and email. We may want to use these tools. These are the ones that are compliant: SEMrush, Jasper, and HubSpot. These are the terms around disclosure, and whenever we're using generative AI images or videos, we must disclose those. We're going to mitigate risk by periodic reviews and audits. And then we have an escalation policy around if there's any issues. And then we also have a regular meeting where changes can be reviewed and discussed. And so just think about like someone new into a marketing team that's enthusiastic about AI or maybe used AI differently and another organization is joining yours, how helpful something like this might be to get started and making sure that it's not the Wild West and that people are kind of using these things in the way that we all want them to. And then finally, where is the right application of these tools within the marketing teams and the marketing tasks? And I think even though I spent a fair bit of time going through a bunch of these different tools, I think we need to look at it through a different lens and not get focused on the tools and think about, well, how can these apply to the things that I might want to be able to do? I think it'd be a lot more helpful to be able to think about like the tasks that you have or the tasks that you want to be able to do and then from there, figure out if there's AI tools and technology to be able to help you accomplish those things. One of the things that I've found really helpful in finding the application of AI within marketing teams is just this concept of jobs being a bundle of tasks. So it may not take Tim's job. AI may not take the job of an educator. If I take the earlier example, an AI might not be able to just create the podcast. But if you start to deconstruct the production of a podcast, there could be many different tasks that AI could help with or partially help with. And so the deconstruction of workflow as well as tasks can be helpful to figure out, oh, there might be a couple of areas here where we could get some productivity, in other cases where we can't. Jobs are a bundle of tasks. Some of those tasks might be appropriate for AI. But I think the bigger one, and I've been talking a lot about this, and I think it's not probably talked about enough, is that we end up going down this train of thought with generative AI and AI in general, is it just purely being about efficiency and productivity, and a little bit less about the kinds of things that we would like to do, but haven't had the resources or time to be able to do. And so thinking about it in terms of capability, not just efficiency. And so all marketing teams kind of have this even if it's not that articulated, just this idea of marketing maturity, the kinds of things that you'd like to do at a bigger scale or a level of sophistication or launching something new in a different channel. But for whatever reason, there's constraints to be able to do it. It can be helpful to take a look at can AI help unlock these types of things that you always wanted to do but can't? That's another kind of angle to figure out different kinds of use cases. And then remember, the human in the loop, the concept that humans are going to be integral in terms of the application of technology into different kinds of roles to make sure the quality is up and the risk is mitigated. And so even if you can't apply an AI tool to completely automate something that feels quite repetitive, even if you're just sort of delegating certain portions to AI, that could be a win. And so remember that it doesn't have to be kind of like either or. It typically is an and. And so this is another, in the same way that you might want to get a team together to come up with some guidelines. I've run a number of different kind of just workshops with teams to plot out different candidate use case opportunities for AI. And you could easily do this yourself. You just think about like the different marketing priorities that you have. What tasks are time consuming or providing bottlenecks or activities do people not want to do? And these might be kind of give you a little bit of a starting point of the types of candidate areas that you might want to tackle. And then you see how those map to the different capabilities that AI presents around creation or summarization or editing and extraction. And then from there, when you start to see some of those connections, you can start to identify different kinds of use case opportunities. We're going to use this capability to help this person complete this task. And then you kind of flush these out. And this, I would encourage you, you've probably done some form of this already, to do this with the team because it might kind of surface some areas that could be good kind of pilot programs. And if you have a good couple of good candidates here, you're doing this kind of workshop and you're getting a lot of nodding heads, it can be really helpful. And this isn't AI specific, it's more kind of digital or project adoption specific, is document these things in kind of a clear and consistent way. And so here's another format that might be helpful is when you're kind of figuring out how AI could be used for a different use case and you want to be able to pilot it, create a use case document that might look something like this. Here you're kind of documenting the user and the task and all these other good stuffs. And so an example, if that could be pharma specific, could be we want to use AI to create written summaries of conference symposium recordings. Nice use case. It could be time consuming that we can use an AI to be able to do. Here I'm documenting the user, the purpose, the benefit, the capability. But the area that I do want to highlight most is what we have at the bottom here, measures and criteria. Here, we don't, remember the goal isn't just to bring on AI. The goal is to improve outcomes by the use of AI. So we want to have a benchmark and measure to understand if that's actually going to be impactful or not. And so in this particular case, we're kind of documenting it. And so this is sort of the habit that we can start to get into to be a bit more structured about how we start to pilot AI. We may end up having a backlog of these different use cases that we want to be able to employ over time. Maybe it's just a couple or one of these a quarter that you might want to do, but the idea is, we have an active program that we're trying to find opportunities to incorporate these different tools and then share what you're learning. Some of those could be the incorporation of some of these different tools into workflow. Another thing that I've seen, and I'm kind of creating my own that I go back to, is creating like a prompt library. And for some of these different kind of common tasks that I might use a frontier model for, I might include those for my own personal reference. But if you have a team, you might want to incorporate some of these different prompts that could be helpful and just kind of share that over time. Those kinds of things could be helpful to create a little bit momentum and make adoption a little bit more effective. But I think I'm going to have a drink of water. I think we have a poll here, Kate. Yeah, I'm very curious to see the results of this. So what would help your team adopt generative AI most effectively today? Right. Okay, a real variation here. Number one, training, guidelines, and governance. Great. And just so you know that training is there's a Marketing AI Institute does a study every year and asks very similar questions. And over the last 3 years, training is the number one barrier. So it's interesting to see that sort of reflected here in terms of adoption and role-specific training, not necessarily general training. All right. So enough of me rambling. What does this all mean? Where does the rubber hit the road? So I want to put John on the hot seat here. And John, you are the perfect person to ask some of these questions to because you've had a career of really kind of leading technical adoption within a marketing context. And
Yes,
now you're
absolutely.
doing that within AstraZeneca over the last 5 years. How have you approached organizing, AI at AstraZeneca?
Mhm. Uh, well, we've done a little bit of what you were talking about before, which is making sure that we get internal alignment first, right? We use a tool called Jasper within our organization. It was a tool that we piloted with Global, just to make sure that it met our needs, and we did a pilot. It was successful. So when we started to think about, okay, how do we want to use this tool now, and what use cases do we want to use it in? I made sure that I sat down with compliance, legal, privacy, and IT, and we sat down and we had a discussion around, what we want to do, the different use cases. And that was really important for us to make sure that everything was called out in that alignment meeting and that everyone was on board and held hands and said, okay, this is our approach with this tool. So that was key. And the governance piece that you were talking about before, how does this now fit within our digital governance framework? We're working on that. We're working through that right now. But it's something that I wanted to make sure internal alignment was there first before we move on.
Totally makes total sense. And then you mentioned, Jasper. How did you figure out like where you wanted to start? There's so many of these different kinds of tools and technologies and applications. How did you just kind of land on Jasper and figure out how you wanted to kind of move forward with that
Yeah.
first tool?
Yeah. I mean, we had a lot of guidance from Global. And so when we were introduced to the tool, we ran it through the ringer and kind of put together some things that we wanted to do. For us right now, content production, content efficiency is kind of the number one use case. That's key. As everyone here is probably going through 2025 planning, there are three core themes that kind of rise up as my group is kind of working through that: efficiency, innovation, and scale. And when I look at generative AI, it fits all three of them, right? Efficiency in terms of like, how can we get to market faster with a piece of content? Um, and can we save any money in doing that? Innovation, how do we look at generative AI and look at other use cases in terms of other areas? Maybe there's the compliance area where we could make that go a little bit faster through MLR. And then around scaling, and we can talk about this later on, but just because you have a tool, it doesn't mean that internally everyone's going to say, okay, I'm ready to use it, right? How do you convince people of the benefit? How do you move people along to say, okay, this is now available? Um, my team is a cross-functional team that supports the commercial business and the medical business. And so what we've decided to do is centralize the use of the tool within my team. Um, that's for cost reasons as well, because the licenses are pretty expensive. Well, they can be expensive if you apply it to the rest of the organization. So how do you centralize it to maybe a couple of people, and then you partner up with the organization when they have a need, and then they work together in terms of making the output happen. But we've I think an organization can take any road they wish. Either they open it up to everybody and want everybody to use a tool, or they centralize it. Right now, for us, like centralizing makes the most sense. It allows us to kind of contain and really kind of be that subject matter expert, and then work with the brand marketers in terms of what their needs are.
Amazing. And how has it gone? Like what have the results been
Yeah,
like? Is there anything you can
yeah.
share?
Yeah, we have put a couple use cases in market. And what we saw was 50% reduction in timelines and 80% reduction in costs. And so those things were really appealing to our executive team. But I will say that we're still very much early days. I think we are still trying to figure out how this fits within our workflow. With the first couple of instances that we created, um, someone from my team, did the prompting, uploaded it with certain, documents to start creating that first draft. And that's kind of a key for us, is like, how fast can we get to that first draft? But one of the things that we learned for sure was, one, it's not a silver bullet. You're not going to like prompt it and then have a clean first draft. Human intervention is required. And so, especially when you are developing content that impacts patient lives, you have to be very careful. Another thing that we learned was, someone from my team, and then working with one of the brand marketers was essential. Like it can't just fall within the cross-functional partner to figure out, because they're not the expert in the brand. So the back and forth, the partnership, the investment that we had from the brand marketer sitting down with someone from my team and going back and forth and, going through a couple of iterations, helped us to land in a place where we felt comfortable to, put it into the MLR stage. So, um, that collaboration, that partnership between your cross-functional partner and brand marketing is so key. Another thing too is, this doesn't mean that the agency goes away. In some of our use cases too, we landed on a first draft that we thought was pretty good, but then we flipped it over to our agency and said, hey, can you take a look at this and can we go back and forth and can you help us move this along to kind of final product? So the agency can still fit within your workflow, in the creation of the asset. Uh, but right now, like I mentioned before, like we're still looking at scaling, right? And that's kind of the three things: efficiency, scaling, innovation. So scale now. It's like, how do we get this tool adopted within our workflow? Because it's very hard for people to change their workflow, right? They're really used to just doing one thing one way. With this new tool, with this new element, um, trying to make them understand what it can do, the power of it, and then getting the business to adopt it on a more frequent basis.
Amazing. Amazing. Well, those are big numbers too, John. And no wonder you're getting some support for and more interest in AI. And so, do you have any tips? Like we're here with well over 100 pharma marketers here. Like you're a little bit probably maybe further along than most in terms of like your level of adoption. Any kind of tips that you would might provide some of these different marketers that are thinking about taking a similar path?
Yeah, don't go so broad. Like really hone in and focus in on one area. So for us, we focused on email, right? Um, so start small, start with a pilot, figure out, what it is that you want to get out of that. Maybe you start with an unbranded piece first, right? Rather than a branded piece. So really, take small steps and learn. And it's okay like to fail, just, fail fast, iterate, and figure out how you can fit this within your workflow. It doesn't have to be everything all at once. Like, don't say, okay, we're now going to do everything, email, web, podcast, video, everything is going to get like now go through AI. Really be really focused on kind of where you want to try this and see how it works. And then you can go from there. And then just, again, get internal alignment. This is a huge change management exercise. And like we experienced with digital years ago, this is now a new chapter within our digital transformation. And so you need to make people comfortable, make people understand the training piece that you're talking about. Maybe there's broader training and then there's training for those that are actually doing the prompting. But this is another element that we're now, faced with in the digital landscape. So embrace it, get internal alignment, and get people to move along with you.
I've got a question from our listeners. Could we
Sure.
use AI to develop market trend matrix like the Boston Consultants Matrix? And what tools would you recommend?
I'm going to flip that over to
Yeah, I feel
Tim.
like this is a Tim question, and I've got one
Yeah.
for you in a second, John.
Yeah. Well, if I understand the question correctly, sort of like in my mind, it goes to like sort of like a 2 by 2
Mm-hmm.
around sort of like
Same.
plotting some of these different pieces. Um, and so I think part of it would be coming up with the data that would use to be able to do the formula. And so it can, some of these tools like Perplexity and the research-based models, presuming they're up to date, could help you summarize, I guess, some of the features that you would use as the attributes. Um, and then the tools are very good about like doing some kind of formatting. And so you would need to sort of describe the table. So I think there could be parts of it, but to John's point, you would need the domain expertise over whatever you were trying to like create a table around to sort of understand if what you're getting back is valid or not. But in my experience, a tool is great at sort of helping you with the research piece, and the tool can be really help in terms of like the formatting piece once the data is clean.
Cool. John, one for you.
Yep.
Jasper's a public tool, and you could do probably a whole webinar on this. How has AZ secured their own data, and how have you defined governance around it? So, big
Yeah.
question.
Yeah, for sure. Let me
And
be ve-
3 minutes
yeah.
to answer.
Yeah, okay. Let me be very clear. We're not using any public tools. So yes, so Jasper is a public tool. We have our own contained environment, right? So we have our own contained environment with, ChatGPT as well with like as an organization. So the instance that we're using with Jasper is our own kind of closed contained and like environment. So everything that we do in there is protected and we're securing that data and it's kind of following within our organizational protocols. So um, that's kind of the instance that we're using with it. And around the governance piece, we're still working through some of those things, but sitting down with compliance, legal, and privacy to iron those things out and just making sure that everything is going to, protocol.
Great, thank you. Good. So we're on time. Well done, guys. And if any other questions come through, I'll keep an eye and we can maybe get back to you as follow up with answers. So feel free to, if you are thinking of things, do send them across. We won't just ignore them. So thanks, Tim. Thanks, John. I'm glad we got in some key terms there, like frameworks, guidelines, governance. I guess takeaways for me: start small, experiment, gain your confidence. Use Gen AI to combine meeting notes, proof copy, help you in some of those day-to-day jobs. I guess when you're ready, have that clear objective of how Gen AI is going to fit, because then you can create your business cases from that. And again, another keyword, alignment. So before you crack on, think about who you need to speak to and speak to them early. And I guess shameless plug, but if you have liked what you've heard today, we are very much in this business of supporting marketers in the Gen AI space. We've got a couple of in-person events coming up, one in Europe in March in London. And I guess if you haven't attended one of our events before, so far everyone we've done is sold out, which has been amazing. And the survey says over 100% of our attendees surveyed have all said they've learned something new. So far, we've had some really great feedback. We also run a training academy with Tim. So if you do want any training on Gen AI, MarTech, agile marketing, marketing trends, we do offer both these in virtual and in person. So you know where I am if you've got any questions. And before you go, please complete our feedback survey, as your feedback helps us to develop the next one. So thanks again, John. Thanks, Tim. Have a great rest of your day, guys. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Kate. Thanks,
Bye.
John.
Thank you so much.